Welcome to Lights Out at Houston Public Library. Today I'm going to read you a story from Scary Story Reader by Richard and Judy Dockery Young, published by August House. And the story is Tad O'Cain and the Corpse. Tad O'Cain was the youngest son of a rich man, and his father loved him best. The boy grew up spoiled, always getting everything he asked for from his father. As he grew older, he drank and gambled and spent all his nights in local pubs with dancing girls. His fellow townspeople predicted that when the father died, the youngest son would inherit everything and lose it all within a year. Finally, the father saw what he had done by spoiling his son. He wanted to make it right but didn't know how. He tried the only thing he could think of. He told Tad that he must settle down, end his riotous life, and marry one of the local girls. Tad was furious. He stormed out of the great old house and walked for miles along the road, smoking his pipe and trying to get rid of his anger. He cursed and swore and walked along and ended up saying out loud, "I'd as soon dance with a dead man as get married before I'm ready." Just then, the great bell in the church tower far behind him tolled midnight. Dong, 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 dong. As Tad walked by the little empty chapel in the woods and past its small old graveyard, he heard voices. A low fog rolled over the road, and in it walked about 20 little, gnarled black creatures. They were carrying something heavy, which they set down on the road in front of Tad. It was a rotten corpse, stiff in mummification, with hollow eye sockets staring and mouth agape. Its arms were folded over its chest, and rags of clothes and rotten flesh hung loose from it. Tad's blood went cold, and he stood frozen in fear. One of the little creatures stepped out of the fog and greeted him. "Now, isn't it lucky that we met you just now?" said the wrinkled little thing. Tad was too terrified to speak. "Isn't it just in time that we came along?" asked the little creature with a twinkle in his red eye. Tad trembled and his jaw shook, but he couldn't say a thing. "Now, isn't it lucky and just in time we've met?" said the sharp black shape again. Tad shook as the little creature looked him up and down. "You've got your wish, Tad O'Cain," said the creature, lifting a bony claw and pointing at the corpse. "Get up," it said to the corpse. The dead, rotten thing stood slowly and stiffly and turned its hollow eyes to Tad. He quickly decided to flee as the dead man stepped slowly toward him. Tad managed to get turned around to run, but the dead man grabbed him about the chest with his rotten arms and clung to him like someone riding piggyback. "Now," said the little black creature, "it's your duty to take this poor soul and bury him. He's been lying in an unmarked spot for a year now and deserves better. Get you to the church and bury him, and if you're denied entrance at any church, go on to the next until you've done it. You have to finish by sunrise. Now, be gone with you." The black creatures in the fog laughed, howled, clicked their tongues, and came running out of the fog, chasing Tad. Suddenly, Tad found he could move, and move he did, as fast as he could, down the road with the dead man on his back. At the old gray church, Tad went through the gate and tried the huge wooden door, and it was locked. "The key is above the door," the corpse said, and Tad let out a scream. "Ah!" He reached above the door and found the key. In this church, the dead were buried under the stones of the church floor. Tad found a spade in the corner of the church, but when he lifted a stone from the floor and drove the shovel into the ground, a dead hand came up and pushed the shovel aside. When he lifted another stone and dug, the corpse sat up out of the dirt and pushed him away, pulling the stone back down over itself like a man pulling covers over himself in bed. The third place he dug, a horribly rotten old woman sat up in the broken coffin and reached for Tad's throat. He screamed, "Ah!" and dropped the stone back over her. "I can't bury you here. The ground's all full," Tad cried and ran out the door with the dead thing on his back. He staggered down the road, lost, and the right arm of the corpse let go of him long enough to point the way at the crossroads. Again and again, the dead man pointed the way until Tad arrived at a second chapel and burying ground. He stumbled through the gate and into the cemetery, but as he walked in, a white ghost rose out of the grave and blocked his way. Every way he turned, dozens of spirits shot up out of their graves, blocking his path. At last, there were hundreds. "I cannot bury you here," he cried. "These are all the honest churchgoers, and they will not admit the likes of you or me." Tad turned and staggered out the road. The corpse pointed again and again as Tad stumbled on under the weight. Tad fell down over and over again and was bruised and bleeding as he reached the third church. The graveyard was surrounded by a low, broken-down wall. There was no longer a church here, just a burying ground. There were almost no stone markers, and the graveyard was in terrible disarray with weeds and saplings growing among the graves. The first glow of dawn was forming in the east. Tad was running out of time. He stumbled into the graveyard and almost fell into an open, fresh grave. At the bottom of the hole was a black coffin with the lid open. The coffin was empty. As Tad stood over the grave, reeling and swaying from the pain and exhaustion, the corpse on his back gave a huge sigh. A cloud of stinking, dusty air came out from the dead man's mouth. It relaxed his grip on Tad and fell off. Tad stepped aside and the corpse slid neatly into the hole, dropped into the coffin, and fell down long ways into it. The lid closed with a slam, just as the sun was rising in the east. Tad slowly filled the hole, scooping the fresh dirt with his cupped hands until the grave was finished. Then he staggered to a nearby inn and rented a room. He slept all day and all night, and went home the next day ragged and bruised. He gave up drinking and gambling and married one of the pretty dancing girls from his former favorite pub. They lived happy all their lives, but Tad O'Kane never stayed out until midnight again. The end. Thank you for joining us for Lights Out. I hope you'll come back again.